My name is Jonathan Tipples and I'm Chairman of the HGCA. I have with me Jack Watts and Helen Plant from our Market Intelligence team. So, what's been happening in the grain markets in the last few weeks, Helen?
Grain markets have really continued on the downward trend. They began in May this year, reaching some of the lowest levels we've seen in nearly 4 years on the back of anticipated greater global grain supplies this year. At the moment, harvest's underway across Europe and North America, and we're starting to see those estimates come to fruition, and that's really the driving factor at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Jack, Gillian McGill will be speaking about oilseeds. How has this market changed in the last few years?
Oilseed markets have really been really fascinating in recent years, and to my mind they really stepped into a new level when we got into 2011 and 12. At the end of 2011 into early 2012 things started. We had a South American drought. South America is a big powerhouse producer of soybeans, which has huge influence on our own oilseed rape prices. That was then followed in 2012 by the big US drought that impacted a lot of crops, and soybean was no exception to that. So all of a sudden we had quite huge constraints on oilseed availability. We had constrained availability of the world's main oilseed. On top of that, we've had a number of years of difficult weather in Europe, some very cold winters, and that's really hit oilseed rape production in previous years. And those supply side issues were matched by quite strong demand. Everyone talks about the strong demand growth for soybean imports by China as people demand in China a more westernized diet, fueled by the growth in wealth, meaning people want to eat more livestock products. So, and soybean is really the best source of animal protein feed the world has in any great quantity or indeed of quality as well. Now though, we've seen quite a step change. We've seen a good soybean crop at the beginning of 2014 from South America, huge prospects for the US crop this year, and although we're still seeing demand growth from China, that demand growth is starting to slow. So all of a sudden the situation looks to be changing a little bit. On top of that, in Europe we've got a better crop of rapeseed expected from the 2014 harvest, and that's really put some downward pressure on the prices. So the dynamics are easing back. We're not seeing the big prices, of course, that we were used to just a few years ago, simply because the supply dynamics are much better supplied, and we're not seeing this rapid demand growth that we probably were used to 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, interesting. Helen, back to you. What should we be looking for from the bioethanol market this autumn?
The bioethanol market is quite an interesting one at the moment, and it is a really dynamic market. Although when you do get lower prices, you would sort of anticipate an increase in usage for ethanol, but it's not as straightforward as that, and it's really quite a complex picture, and that's something that I'll be looking to our speaker at this year's conference to talk more about.
Okay, thanks. Tell me about your fourth speaker, Sergei Feofilov from the Ukraine. What are you going to be looking for from his presentation, Jack?
While we were so keen to have a Ukrainian come in to the conference this year, Ukraine has, of course, been on the agenda for a number of years. It's a big producer, it's a cheap producer of grain, and part of the whole Black Sea region, which represents some of the cheapest grain in the world, feeding quite delicate areas of the world, North Africa, Middle East. So what happens in that part of the world, not just in terms of production, but in terms of the world of logistics and finance, is really, really quite important, and sentiment plays a huge part of that, as well as the traditional fundamentals such as the weather. And Ukraine's created an awful lot of sentiment through 2014 about how the country is developing, its stability, its ability to meet its export expectations to basically supply grain into those key importing countries, which we hear so much about as well in the news. I'm interested to see really how the path forward is changing for Ukraine in terms of how is the attitude to longer term investment changing with the amount of geopolitical, and how the attitude to outside investment is changing, how Ukraine is going to align itself. Is it along European lines, or is it more towards a more Soviet-style kind of an approach? And I think the whole market is waiting to get an idea of the longer-term direction that Ukraine takes.
Okay, so lastly for you then, Jack, 4 different speakers, 4 different topics. What's going to be the overriding theme of the conference?
Really, we're looking, I believe, at changing perspectives. We've got a huge number of drivers, a huge amount of uncertainty, which is a real challenge for any business, as well as farming, but especially farming because it's such a long-term business, and uncertainties is a real challenge to try and deal with. And there are a lot of challenges. Of course, got lower prices. I've been presenting at the Grain Market Outlook Conference since 2009. I think this is probably the most bearish market environment that I've presented in. But it's not just a case of production up, prices down. There are other issues. It's about how, as an industry, do we manage that price risk? How do we manage the other challenges? Although not covered at the conference, we've got challenges such as cap greening and the removal of key inputs, particularly for oilseed rape. And how is that going to influence what we do on farms across the UK and how we build resilience? So I'm hoping at the conference we've got this broad spectrum of speakers, but it's just going to cover off some of the real key issues that are really very uncertain and that really levy payers need some key answers to.
Okay, thanks, Jack and Helen. So with so much uncertainty in the grain and oilseed markets, this year's conference looks like being a completely unmissable event.